Well, thank you for coming out this evening. I was given the first task of giving this talk was to be about Austrian economics and its present state, and I decided I would try to make it a little bit less esoteric than that, but if people want to push it in that esoteric direction, I hope that you'll do it in the Q&A. I'm very grateful to be here and actually for Bumper's being involved with our students here. Kevin, is doing a fantastic job here as the president, and I encourage you to get to know the Future of Freedom Foundation very intimately. Bumper and I have a long history of tied intellectual passions that go and commitments that go all the way back to the Foundation for Economic Education and the basic mission that organization had for teaching people and introducing them to the principles of sound economics and of the principles of individual liberty, a society of free and responsible individuals. And I really encourage all of you to follow closely what goes on with the Future of Freedom Foundation, because a lot of our organizations, when the rubber hits the road, they cave. And Bumper, you never did that. And we all owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude, because these have been difficult times over the last decade to be a principled libertarian. And your organization has been a principled libertarian organization, so it's an honor for me to stand up here before you. I think it's also the case that we just saw that it was very easy for economists who are trained and supported by free market organizations to not stand by the principle when push comes to shove in a thing like the financial crisis. I am tired of hearing so many free market economists tell you that the bailout was necessary. Yes, it's a terrible thing, but had we not done it, the whole system would have ground to a halt, okay? And this actually, for those of you who are students of economics, is a very big issue because it's an economic theory issue. It's an economic theory issue that has an economic historical interpretation issue that's tied to it, that and then turns back and has a public policy influence today. It is an issue that relates to how you understand the Great Depression. If you believe that the problem with the Great Depression was one of a liquidity trap, all right, and a credit crunch, and therefore the Fed's problem in the 1930s, early 1930s, was that the Fed didn't increase the money supply enough, then you will in fact argue that we needed the kind of infusion, state infusion into the credit markets and the financial sector in general in order to keep the economy going. But if you instead see the economy as having its difficulties precisely because of the regulations and restrictions that generated perverse incentives and distorted information, then the answer is not government. Okay? An easy way to put this is you can divide these questions about, what government should be doing into questions about ought and can. On the one hand, we can have a debate about what we ought to do. The problem with a lot of the discussion is that a lot of the discussions about ought presuppose can. Just because we ought to do something doesn't necessarily mean that we actually can do it. Okay? Which, if everyone understands what I'm saying. So we give this big bailout, supposedly that's going to stabilize markets, but then the stock market falls by 500 points at some point today, right? And European markets are down and very shaky. How do you interpret those events? One of the ways to interpret those events is that, what we did on Friday hasn't yet been able to stabilize the markets. Once it does, it will all work out. This presupposes that our government officials can accomplish what the bailout intends to do. But what if that's not right? What if in the implementation of the policy, it can't achieve what, if we could agree it ought to do, it couldn't do? And where do we get the information about that ability to achieve that? I would argue that comes from Austrian economics and public choice economics. Two missing factors in this discourse over these issues. I would also contend further that it's not only if we can do something that we ought to do it, which is think about what the debate became last week. Can we get our politicians to agree to bail out the financial sector in the United States? And it became a challenge of the can, right? Not of whether or not the bailout would achieve its goals, but whether or not a Congress can in fact get together and work together. Think about both of our political candidates. I promise not to wink tonight that much. I will try to be folksy, but I won't give you the wink or the tug on my ear. Which, by the way, I have to admit that when I saw the debate last week, I actually thought it was kind of cute because I only noticed her do it when she mentioned her father. So she mentioned her father. I thought, oh, it's a Carol Burnett thing. I'm showing my age. Carol Burnett, used to, tweet her, and I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. But then they showed the rerun of it, and she was like winking all the time. I was like, oh my God, this is a little ridiculous. But and I do think that actually the McCain campaign, from not from a libertarian point of view, but from a political observer point of view, missed a tremendous opportunity last week because they didn't stand out from what the policy prescription of Biden and of Obama and Biden, right? So basically, you're choosing between Tweedledee and Tweedledum on the issue of the financial bailout, because both of them were in favor of the bailout. So what was McCain's big selling point? I can work a bailout, right? We need to work together, bipartisanship, in order to pull this out. How many here watched Sunday Morning? Anyone? Did you watch Sunday Morning yesterday? It was all about gridlock and how gridlock is like a bad thing. Divided government is a bad thing. We need to get rid of gridlock because it prevents us from being able to pull things off. It's the do-somethingism mentality, right? They need to be doing something. And so the claim is that, we can get together and work this bill. So what did McCain say? It's good legislation, right? What did Obama say? It's good legislation. But just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you ought to do it. And I think we forget on both sides this aspect of the ought and can equation. And what sober economics does is it puts parameters on people's utopias. All right? Even though we ought to do something, economics comes along and says, nope, can't accomplish it. Let's say I convinced you in this crowd that we should all flap our arms and fly to the moon. Right? If we just all got together, we could flap our arms, right, and keep going, and then we'd fly to the moon. All right? If I came along as the physicist and I said to you, can't do that, right, people would believe me. But as an economist, if I come along and the equivalent of, let's all flap our arms and fly to the moon, and I come along as an economist and I say, can't do that, people ignore the advice. So anger can be a muse. So on the way into, it's not always the best way to think about economics, but I hate traffic. I used to teach at New York University for many years, and my wife and I bought a house in New Jersey with 2 years left when I was teaching in New York, and after 1 year, I was taking the train, and there actually was some murders. So I decided I would drive, and so I did that for a year, and swore I would never do anything like that again, to be a college professor. I mean, if I was making a couple $1 billion like people on Wall Street, and getting a golden parachute, but a college professor driving in was kind of a tough thing to do, and so I swore I'd never fight traffic again. And then I moved down here, and then they decided to set up this thing called the Mercatus Center and move it to Arlington. And and I bought a house literally within a stone throw of the university in Fairfax. And so I'm like, why did they do this to me? But anyway, I have to go down there, and I'm on. And so now I listen to NPR and things like that for whatever weird thing. I now listen to C-SPAN radio. All right, so I'm listening to C-SPAN radio this morning, and Henry Waxman is on. Anyone following these hearings? This is the hearings on government oversight, and they're basically trying to blame everything on the CEOs, right?